So a lot of this ends up becoming struggling readers. They'll begin to avoid reading. So I'll give a quick example before we tie it back into reading. So again, avoidance is a symptom, and if you've ever worked with like a PA system and a microphone and a speaker, you get what's called like a feedback loop. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're speaking into a microphone, and as you speak into it, the sound from the microphone goes to the speaker. But let's say the speaker's like positioned right behind the microphone. Well, as the speaker sends the sound out, it goes into the microphone, which then goes through the cable back to the speaker, which then goes out the speaker, but then back into the microphone, through the cable back to the speaker. It creates this feedback loop. It's a very loud, high pitch, nearly blast your ears apart kind of a noise. And for anyone who's ever worked with a PA system before understands that frustration. But it's the same thing with struggling readers and them avoiding reading. So what happens is a struggling reader, when they don't have that fluency and they don't have a lot of vocabulary knowledge, they'll begin to avoid reading. And the problem with that is they have to deal with repeated failures and repeated stress while reading. Because if you don't know what you're reading, if you can't explain what you're reading, it's very frustrating. It's mentally exhausting. And instead of having to deal with that, they just start to avoid reading. The problem with that is that as they avoid more reading, well, that means they're going to get exposed to less vocabulary, which means that now their vocabulary doesn't grow. And when they will eventually be exposed to more difficult texts later on in the years, instead of growing with the difficulty of the text, their ability to read has basically, the gap has widened more and more. So now they're dealing with even more difficult vocabulary and even more difficult text, which means they will avoid it even more than before. And as that happens year after year after year after year, it gets to a point where that foundational skill of reading, the gap has widened so much and compounded so much that they develop that mindset of, well, I'm not improving with this. And not only am I not improving, but everything's getting harder and harder. I hate reading. So that avoidance is really just the response to being constantly overwhelmed by all the various tasks that reading requires of them.